So, India now wants its own AI brain that thinks in Indian languages, not just translates English. The government's 10,000 crore rupees India AI mission is funding homegrown companies like Soket Labs, Sarvam AI, and Gyani.ai to build Indic large language models. But as Abhishek Upperwal of Soket Labs and ET's AI expert Swathi Moorthy explained to me in this episode, the hardest part isn't code or chips, it's clean, massive, high quality data. You see, only about 1% of global open source datasets are in Indian tongues. So, startups are licensing books and audio, crowdsourcing voices, even generating synthetic corpus. Yet, they still need tens of trillions of tokens to match global rivals like OpenAI or Gemini. Or do they? In this episode, we decode how startups are creating and funding new language datasets at scale. Why do sovereign AI ambitions demand Indic first data, not just translation from English? Can India's frugal innovation beat global giants with fewer GPUs? And what business opportunities will open up if these models succeed? Listen on, it's Friday, the 26th of September. I'm your host, Anirban Chowdhury. This is the Morning Brief. Swathi, Abhishek, very warm welcome to the Morning Brief.
Thanks,
Hey.
Anirban. Great to be here.
Hey, hi, good morning.
Swathi, starting with a basic question, what is the story around Indic data? What is its potential? And what is the government's push that has encouraged so many startups to get into this space?
So, the Indic language data falls under the ambit of sovereign AI, where every country is developing its own AI. So, that is what the Indian government is also trying to do under India AI mission. And this is key for a couple of reasons. In my earlier conversation with Stanford professor James Landay, he pointed out why we need to have our own Indic LLM. Most of the large language models like the OpenAI, the Gemini, you name it, they are trained on Western data, which is primarily English. They do not embody the cultural values of Asia and other countries. And that is one of the reasons why every country should have their own LLM, which can embody their cultural values. And number two, for sovereign applications like defense, in defense cybersecurity, it's important to have a data or a model that is trained on our own sovereign data. And of course, geopolitics. Given the way things are happening right now, geopolitics is playing a significant role in how we interact. These are the three key reasons why you should have an Indic model. And companies like Soket AI, Abhishek Soket AI, and Sarvam, these are what the companies are trying to tap into. Abhishek, why do we need our own Indic language model? And what are the kind of use cases that we could actually use it for? If you can just answer these two.
I think all of us in the world have certain aspirations when it comes to AI. Like we are building these aspirations right now. When it comes to the legal domain, say for example, US has a different set of legalities around it. India has a different set of legal aspects around it. What's happening is that I'll give an example of a startup who we were working with, an open source model which was primarily coming from the Western world. They tried fine tuning it on a Indic legal data set. What ultimately ended up happening was that that model started hallucinating and started giving some hybrid laws, which is sort of like a mixture of US plus Indian law. Legal is a very, very critical domain. Defense, again, is a very critical domain. For example, if I go to Ministry of Defense and I tell them that, look, DeepSeek is an amazing model, you guys should definitely utilize it, they will literally throw me out of the room. The reason is we don't even know what got cooked into that particular model when the model was getting trained. Because as far as we know and the kind of inference we have done with that model, it says that Arunachal Pradesh is not part of India, it's part of China. Certain regions in Ladakh are again not part of India, they're part of China. There are all these biases that exist, which are there with respect to the Chinese Communist Party, and using the same model under any kind of setup in an Indian context might not be good for us. So these are some of the aspects where we see that AI can play a very critical role, and we should be building our own sovereign AI. So inclusivity is very, very important when it comes to AI. And these are some of the factors which are basically motivated companies like us to ultimately go out and build systems which are useful for the masses.
What is your biggest bottleneck right now?
So as of now, data definitely is the biggest bottleneck. Just to give you simple statistics, there is a very famous data corpus out there which is called MC4, multilingual C4. If you look at what quantum of languages data is available in the corpus, you will hardly find like 1% of the data which is all Indic languages. So you can very easily see that not a lot of data is actually available on the internet, which is Indic specific data sets. And whatever is available is also not being aggregated in a way that it can be utilized to pre-train a foundation model. We are tackling that particular challenge by going out, getting the data that is not readily available in many of these data corpus that exist out there, and then also creating data sets which are coming from proprietary sources. We are taking licenses of these data corpus. We are generating bulk load of synthetic data by doing translations, by using other models which have permissive license around them. So much of the efforts are actually now going into creating that data which never existed and then ultimately utilizing that data to build our own sovereign model.
You're talking about creating your own data sets, be it synthetic data or cutting deals. But if you look at the larger companies like the Googles, the Metas, I have read the reports that they have confirmed that these companies are actually using YouTube and Instagram data respectively for training their models when you have given explicit consent. So doesn't that put companies like you as a disadvantage? Because Insta and YouTube have plethora of Indic language data which you don't have access to.
These companies have a lot of data. That's absolutely true. But that does not mean that we do not have sufficient data in the open domain to ultimately train out these models. Again, I'll tell you in terms of the kind of data that these models require. It's not just plain simple data, because when we say data, there is a knowledge data corpus and then there is a lot of noise around it too. Say, for example, content that is available on Twitter or on maybe Instagram is not very knowledge rich data corpus. Definitely, you can get a lot of data, which is natural conversations on Twitter, how people typically speak with each other. It's very, very natural. But because it's not a knowledge corpus, the model will not be able to learn a lot of other knowledge related aspects from that particular data corpus. So even if, say, for example, Meta wants to train out the model or the Llama model, they're not just relying on Instagram data set if they are using that. They anyways have to go out on the internet because majority of the knowledge corpus exists on the internet, which is again in an open domain. The next evolution should be that, okay, fine, the model understood the knowledge corpus. Now we want the model to also understand how humans on a day-to-day basis talk to each other. Then I think this data on Twitter and Instagram or any other social media platform becomes relevant to align it towards more natural human conversations.
My question is, even if I wanted my interaction with the LLM to be, say, in Hindi or Tamil, why would I need them to depend on Indic language datasets? Can't they just, because my queries would be, research on, say, the Russia-Ukraine war and its impact on gold. And if they wanted to give it to me in Hindi, they could just use English datasets and just translate, right?
Right. So people have been trying out such techniques where they are taking a lot of English domain content and then they are using either implicit or explicit translation. So what I mean by that is one way could be that fine ChatGPT is amazing when it comes to English. So I'll just generate bulk load of English content. For example, you ask, tell me about the Ukraine-Russia war. The response would come in English, but then within my pipeline, I'll have a translation kind of like node where all this information that comes out of the model gets translated to Hindi or any of your native language and is then ultimately presented to you. The challenge is that many of these translation systems that exist as of now, they are deep learning systems, but they are not implicitly intelligent in a way that they don't store knowledge. They are amazing at understanding languages and then doing translation. But again, if you have a pure translation system, most of the time your context is actually lost during the translation phase itself because these systems are very, very trivial. Then people have tried other means. Because large language models are smart enough, they can implicitly do translations when they are doing the inference. So these models, as soon as you ask, tell me about the Ukraine-Russia war, but generate a response in Hindi. the thinking tokens that the model is generating, those might be generated in English. But when the model starts generating response, the model will take these thinking tokens, which are primarily in English, but use implicit conversion or translation that it understands and will start generating response in Hindi. The model is thinking in English, but then is responding to you in Hindi. And the quality that you might get be way better. Now, there's a
Right.
third way too. The
Hmm.
third way is natively build these models in your own language. So, say, for example, why should I even be relying on English language when it comes to the thinking process? That you can think in Hindi and respond in Hindi. Maybe the quality of the response that you might be getting would be way better as compared to when you think in English and then respond in Hindi. So it's very similar that is happening in the large language model side.
Wouldn't it have been a better idea for the government to try to organize large data sets in the vernacular languages in some way before pushing this? Yeah,
The
yeah.
government has made a few things. So, for example, there are a couple of projects that are already available. And I want Abhishek to weigh in on this because I have a specific question. So, we
Right.
have AI for Bharat, which is open source data. Then there is Bashini. Bashini has Wani project where they are developing 150,000 hours of Indic language speech from 733 districts. It's an initiative of IISc, Art Park, and Google. And then there is AI Kosh. Abhishek, I want to come to you here because I want to understand how much data does it actually take to train a model for what you just said, thinking in our own native language instead of thinking in English and then translating.
So there are multiple initiatives that are happening within the government of India, not just the India mission. I think India mission is heavily pushing multiple aspects for it. And I would also say, I think the approach that the government of India is taking is actually the right approach. If they would have maybe said that, okay, we'll invest 1 year or 2 years in just dataset curation and post that we will look at how do we build out these models, it might not have worked because dataset curation job will never end. There is endless data out there and there is no bound to it on how much you want to ultimately aggregate. So when they said that Socket AI go ahead and build out a frontier model, implicitly we have been mandated to even aggregate that particular data corpus because we won't be able to build out the model unless we have figured out the data problem first, right? And that also becomes a priority. Again, in our proposal that we submitted to the government of India, we have added the cost for both. It's not like just it's a cost only for training out the models. We will also ask for the cost for data set curation, and that data ultimately will also contribute to the open community so that others can even like build something on top of it. So that is one. Second, how much data do we require? That's actually a very good question, and that also depends on how big your model is and what kind of expectations do you have from the model. So our foundation model is a 120B. Right now, we are thinking of building out a sparse mixture of expert, which is a super efficient architecture, and we have estimated that we would require close to 15 to 20 trillion tokens to train this particular model out, which is of very high quality. Now, 15 to 20 trillion tokens, if you look at the larger corpus, we start aggregating a bulk load of data from whatever sources that are there in the open domain. And this data will have a lot of noise. This data will have a lot of duplicate entries. We start pre-processing this data. We start removing some of the abusive things that the data might contain. So there are multiple steps just to pre-process this data corpus that we have because this data is absolutely raw and we don't want to show the raw corpus to the model because the model will never be able to converge. So we have to improve the quality of the data overall. So after doing all these pre-processing steps, we expect that we will have close to 2 to 3 petabytes of data that would ultimately translate to 15 to 20 trillion tokens overall. And that is what the model will be shown ultimately. So that's the scale that we are looking at. Obviously, this is just for text modality. If you add more modalities, say, for example, images, you add audio, your data size would substantially increase because text storage is not a lot. But to store images, to store audio, obviously the size is a lot more, and hence your storage space and the kind of data aggregation that you are doing would ultimately expand. So that's the scale that we are looking at.
So, the government had said they would make the Prachar Bharati dataset open for training.
So not yet. And we are also in conversation with them because most of the data that is available or that is locked in the government organizations, I think all that data would eventually start opening up for entities like us who are building these foundation tech and even for others as well. Again, my experience working with the government is that getting access to data is never very easy. It's always tricky because most of the time we have to figure out like who is the data owner. It's not like the government of India is the data owner. Government of India is not an entity. Ministry is an entity. So then we need to figure out like how do we ultimately get the data out from that particular nodal agency, and how do we ultimately give it to the agency who wants to utilize it? So that becomes a little bit complicated. So I'm expecting that once this is streamlined, if India does it, amazing. If somebody else does it, that is also amazing. And once it is available, maybe say on AI course, we will be able to utilize it.
Okay, I have another question for Swathi. What is the market potential when the product is actually made? I mean, how can Indian AI startups turn this Indic language data into real money? And of course, Abhishek should weigh in as well.
From what I understand, right now, most of the use cases have been around voice AI, particularly the customer support. That is what Jnani.ai, which is another company which was selected under the India AI mission, and other companies such as Crore, they're all, that is where there are significant focuses going on. And that is where there is a lot of demand is coming from, because the voice AI could potentially replace, is what the industry experts have been telling, to a certain extent the call center operations, to a certain extent the at least the first level of job can be done by automated by AI. And companies are putting in a lot of effort, like Abhishek said, how to emote these voices instead of just sounding like a machine. There's a lot of effort going into this. But from what I understand, the other companies such as OpenAI, Gemini, and even Level Labs, they are getting equally good at this. So my question to Abhishek would be, where do Indian startups like you see a role? We are already behind when it comes to training and creating our own model. Do we really have a chance, especially against the big guns? And these companies are particularly focusing on the Indian market. India is the second largest market already for Level Labs. OpenAI has significant focus in India, and they are even setting up their companies. They are setting up their offices here. So where do you see the market potential for you, especially money? You need to make money at the end of the day.
So I see them as a good indicator, to be frank. I would say that even if, say, for example, OpenAI, they're very aggressive, Eleven Labs, they are very aggressive, they are not understanding the languages and the market and the dynamics of the Indian market as of now. OpenAI can definitely prioritize maybe one or two languages, but then when it comes to dialects, when it comes to low resource languages, I don't think it's OpenAI's problem, because they have to look at a very, very big market, which is the entire globe, what they are targeting. I think when you have to go to the detailing part, especially on the language and low resource language side, there has to be some very specific focus from Indian startups on that particular front. And that is what we are trying to do. We just don't want to be like, okay, we'll just solve for Indian English and Hindi and we are done. Maybe it's a good starting point because majority of the market lies over there and we'll get a lot of opportunities in terms of business. But then we also want to deep dive into other languages, especially on the low resource side, and make them available on the AI platform itself and make the AI available to the people who ultimately want to utilize it.
Finally, Abhishek, do you think we can learn from global low cost models like DeepSeek in building frugal but super efficient and effective Indic data backed AI?
DeepSeek is a very good example. Like they were resource constrained because obviously US was not giving them access to these high-end GPUs. To some extent, we are also resource constrained, although we have access to these high-end GPUs. But maybe India doesn't have that kind of budgetary power or monetary power to ultimately fund like 100,000 GPU clusters and everything. We are also very gradually like increasing our capacity over there. So you would have seen maximum allocation that somebody got very recently was around 8,000 GPUs. Meta alone has more than 100,000 GPUs. So single company has more GPUs as compared to the entire nation of India as of now. So we are definitely resource constrained. And being resource constrained is sort of like an opportunity because our brain would work towards the efficiency side of things. How do we utilize these many GPUs to do something which is amazing, which can be utilized at the world stage? And how do we ultimately build these algorithms and tools and techniques to ultimately do that? How do we aggregate data which is so high quality that the convergence is actually achieved way faster? And what is happening because of that particular effect is that we are moving towards efficient AI. We are not thinking in terms of, oh, bigger is better. We'll have billions of dollars with us. We'll train the model. We don't have that luxury. And not just the training part, even the inference part has to be efficient if you have to make AI available to everyone. And that would ultimately mean maybe making AI not available on the cloud, but maybe distilling the model down and making it available in your phone, where maybe even if you don't have internet access, at least you will have AI locally deployed, and maybe some of the tasks can then be done like locally, and that would also be cheaper for you, right? So that is what I think Indian innovation would mean in the AI space.
Thanks, Abhishek, Swathi, for joining us on the Morning Brief.
Yeah, thanks, Anirban.
Thank you so much, Anirban.
So, India's AI moment hinges on its ability to turn a billion native speakers into billions of quality tokens. The next wave of growth will depend on how fast we can harvest and refine our own words. That's it for today. Vinay Joshi and I produced this episode. It was sound designed by Rajas Naik. A new episode of The Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Thursday and Friday, wherever you get your podcasts. Also, don't miss our brand new show, Corner Office Conversation, where we talk to the most interesting business leaders in India and the world, every alternate Monday on your favorite listening platform. Thank you. Have a good weekend.